Hello, today we're going to be talking about digital audio workspaces and notation software. We're going to be explaining what each one is. We're going to be looking at what are your different options out there in regards to software. We're going to be looking at free ones, we're going to be looking at more paid ones, and then we're going to be talking about the advantages and disadvantages of using one over the other. Now, when I was thinking about this video, I originally was going to do DAW versus notation software. But I felt that wasn't right at all because the different tools for different jobs, and so ultimately it's going to really depend on your project which piece of software you're going to use, and hopefully this video is going to help you decide. Feel free, of course, to skip to different sections of this video. Maybe you already know what a DAW or notation software is, so you can skip that section and maybe look at advantages or disadvantages, or if you're in the market for looking for a piece of software, you can skip to that section. But hopefully this video will help you in some sort of way. So let's just get into it. So what is notation software? Well, it's a program where you physically write music, and ultimately you're going to be creating sheet music from it that you can give to a live performer to play. And so it's going to give you all the tools necessary to do that, and there is playback as well, although that's not the main focus with notation software. The main focus is creating beautiful scores that you can give, as I said, to somebody to perform. So moving on to digital audio workspaces, or DAW for short, you can do everything from record, edit and manipulate audio. This is basically a one-stop shop for the entire music production process. Everything from writing your own melodies, creating beats, using virtual instruments, to then mixing and mastering sounds. Your options are kind of endless, and DAW software, I feel, tends to get a little bit more complicated than notation software. Sometimes, like for example Logic Pro X, they do include like a stave for notation, but it's nowhere near as good or as easy to use as dedicated notation software. Now, with those definitions in mind, I feel it's time to look at what are your options with regards to notation and DAW software. We're going to start off with digital audio workspaces, and specifically GarageBand. Why? Because that's where I started. It's a really fun piece of software where you have a collection of virtual instruments and you can record stuff into it as well. 100% free. You do need a Mac for this, but it walks you really nicely through the basics. It's not too complicated, and when you feel you get your head around this, you can then move into Logic Pro X, which is a really versatile piece of software that is my digital audio workspace of choice. It's colorful, it's an industry standard, and it's continually being updated, and it's not a bad price. With regards to the ones we're going to be looking at, they get quite expensive, and especially if you're starting out and you're a student. I think I only paid like £200 when I was a student for this, and you get it forever, and it came with Final Cut Pro as well, which is an editing software for videos, which is what I'm using now for editing this. But this really good, versatile piece of software, highly recommend. Now, the other one I hear a lot about, because you can only use Logic on Mac OS, is Cubase. This is a really powerful piece of software, and there's different versions, so you can find something that'll fit everybody with regards to this, but especially for Windows users, this is a standard that my business partner actually uses, is Cubase. It's great, does the same thing, MIDI, virtual instruments, recording. You can have a look and research that there, but I highly recommend this one as well. But an industry standard for recording is Pro Tools, I find. What's interesting with the DAW world is that you have some that I feel are better suited for one job over another. For example, with recording audio, if you go into just about any studio in the world, you will find Pro Tools on that computer, and that is what they use for recording. That's just how it is. There is a free version, there's different versions as with most of these except Logic, which is one of the reasons I kind of like it. It's just the simplicity of it's the one, it's this much, there you have it. There's not a light. I guess you could call GarageBand the light version, but it's free. But yeah, Pro Tools, it's definitely one worth wrapping your head around, because it's one, if you're in this industry, you're going to be finding you're going to use. So even if you just get the free version and have a little tinker, but it's a great piece of software, especially for recording. Now, other ones out there, Ableton Live. This is one I hear a lot about as well, and actually price-wise, it's pretty good. I don't like it personally, but it's an option out there, and you can do just about everything else you can on the others. Works on both Windows and Mac OS. This is one I see a lot of producers using Studio One version 6. Can get a bit confusing. Studio 1.6, it's just the 6th version, it's called Studio One. But again, another DAW, as I said, more geared towards producers. As you can see, there is like notation options, you can record on it. What's nice is with just about all of these that we're talking about is there's free trials, or at least a free version of the software. So I don't think Logic has a free trial. Oh, it does now. Brilliant. So with all of these, there are free trials, so you can try it before you buy it. And I would recommend trying a couple of different ones. Now, you might be weighted one way or another, depending on if you're in education and you use a specific one with your school. University-wise, you'll find Logic in most studios. Cubase is another common one educationally wise, and again Pro Tools. Those three are kind of the ones I see the most, especially in the education realm. Another one, FL Studio. I see this one mentioned a lot, although I've not really seen many professionals, at least where I work, using this, but it's an option, it's out there. Another one, this I find is used by a lot of an electric acoustic and synthesizer people. Synthesizer people, yeah, that's a word. Now with Reaper, they do a free, it's almost permanent, it sounds bad, but you can just keep reviewing it. But I would recommend it if you really do like it and use it, buying the full license. The free version isn't a hindrance at all, it's actually the full version, I feel. But you are evaluating it. It is a really cool and actually quite unique piece of software, because you can put multiple things on one track, and the way you layer it is very different to how a lot of the other ones work. It might look a little bit more sketchy website wise than the other ones, but it's an extremely powerful piece of software that you can do a lot of really cool things on that I don't find with others. But it takes a bit to wrap your head around it, I find. So one more piece of software we're going to talk about before we move on to notation software, and that is Reason. This is another piece of software I started out on. I used Cubase and Reason when I was learning digital audio workspaces before I got into Logic, and this is a really cool software that's come quite a long way, because now you can work within it. It has this really cool rack system that helps you, especially, well, it helped me learn racks and chords and stuff, because what you're seeing on here, you can actually flip that around and like connect different bits, and it's a really cool virtual rack experience. And there's a lot of really cool electric music I feel you can create with this. There's a lot of classic plugins that you get with Reason, and it's just a really fun piece of software to jam to, and that you can actually use this in other digital audio workspaces. It has its own place for you to record and edit MIDI, but you can plug this rack system into other digital audio workspaces to get the sounds from it. As I said earlier, a lot of these digital audio workspaces have their perks, and one may be focused more on recording, one may be more focused on virtual instruments. This one I find, even though it can be used as a standalone DAW, is more focused on the virtual instrument and synthesizer aspect, and you do have these really cool plugins, while something like Pro Tools more focused on the recording. Logic I find is a really good all-rounder, the same with Cubase, good all-rounder. So moving on to notation software, I'm going to start with MuseScore 4. What I love about this piece of software is it's free. It's a lot better than the third version of it, and it comes with a really nice playback. Even though the focus is the notation and writing traditional music, it comes with this rather nice, what they call muse sounds, which won't break your computer, but sound awesome and give a really realistic rendition of what you're writing. Now, it is free, it can be buggy. It's debatable how reliable it can be, but it has quite a following. The forums are really handy, and it has a really great community surrounding it, and they are continually updating it. So definitely one I recommend, especially if you're on a budget. Another free one out there is LilyPad. Website's a little bit sketchy, but it is free notation software. Playback, not the best in the world, but it's playback. Next, we're going to move on to a piece of software called Sibelius. It's by Avid, the same creators of Pro Tools. This is what I learned on. A lot of schools will have this software. It's quite an old one as well. It has a lot of history. It's notation software, and almost what I would call an industry standard, because you'll find it just about everywhere. And if you're writing music, I'll be surprised if you've not heard of this piece of software. Now, you can get it on mobile apps now as well, or your iPad. And it's just, to me, a very solid, very versatile and very traditional piece of notation software that you can do just about anything on it. It's questionable what's going on with the company at the moment, because Avid is up in the air and I think being sold, so who knows what's going on. I've done a whole video specifically talking about it and why I think it's the industry standard, so you can check that video out if you want to know more about this piece of software. Now we're going to move on to Finale, more focused I feel on creating beautiful scores. With regards to playback, it's okay. Same with Sibelius. If we just actually flick back to that, the playback on that Sibelius sounds like 30 gigabytes, and it's very questionable and doesn't translate very well, but it's notation software, it does the job. Same with Finale. Again, I feel you can make prettier scores on this, but it's an option out there that people like. Last but not least, I want to talk about Dorico, which is by the same creators of Cubase. Now, what's really interesting about this piece of software, it's kind of tries to merge the gap between a digital audio workspace and notation software. Now, often I find digital audio workspaces try to be a notation software as well, like Logic Pro X, but it doesn't work at all. It's terrible. It's a horrible user experience. But this is kind of going the other way. Dorico's main focus, of course, is creating beautiful scores. But there is a panel where you can kind of flip it, and it becomes this digital audio workspace where you can add virtual instruments. You can't record audio on it, but you can add Spitfire Audio Labs or other sample libraries and put in the MIDI CC to create realistic sounding scores. So not only are you getting this piece of software that creates beautiful scores that you can give to musicians to perform, but you can also create a realistic sounding mock-up all within the same piece of software. Now, for some people that can get rather complex and maybe be a bit too much, because you've got to wrap your head both around notation software and this idea of a digital audio workspace. But I find it's very beneficial, and I've done a whole video talking about Dorico 5 and kind of why I switched from Sibelius to Dorico, because of kind of the medium I work within and that ability to both create gorgeous and beautiful scores and decent sounding mock-ups. Now that transitions us really nicely into talking about what are the advantages and disadvantages between notation software and DAWs and when I would use one over the other. Now, what I like about notation software is the fact that the focus, I feel, is the music. You're not focusing so much on the actual sound quality you're getting from it, as in the playback. You're focused entirely on creating chord progressions, you're creating melodies, you're just delved into this beautiful world of just creating good classic music. While if I'm creating within a digital audio workspace, I feel I'm composing to the sounds. I'm composing to the virtual instruments I'm using. Oh, that doesn't sound quite good, so I'm going to do it slightly different, or I'm going to do all these passages of shorts because the longs don't sound as good. So you kind of lose focus on the music creation process with a digital audio workspace, while I find I can create more realistic and traditional music with notation software. That being said, who has an orchestra at their disposal? So even though I create a beautiful score in Sibelius that looks and performed by a live orchestra would sound great, what am I going to do with it? Do I have the ability to give it to an orchestra, or am I just going to export whatever sound it is from Sibelius and then put it on the internet, and people are going to be like, this sounds like a tin can? So while yes, you can create beautiful scores, I feel the advantage of a DAW is you have that entire musical creating process. You can create realistic sounding mock-ups that people go, whoa, that sounds awesome, and think, especially if you're not in this ecosystem, that it was done by a real orchestra. So that's a huge advantage of wrapping your head around a digital audio workspace, especially in creating orchestral music. Another advantage of a DAW as well is the ability to record. You can't do that with notation software, but that's not the purpose of notation software. So you can get your friend who plays the violin and he can play the solo bit while it's supported by a virtual orchestra. That is an option. Or you can export your score from the notation software and then put it into a DAW to mock up. That's something I do a lot, especially in the beginning, and especially if I want to focus on the music. I'll create that track in Sibelius and then I'll export it and zhuzh it up, as it were. Now we could talk about the actual use of virtual instruments within notation software, but I feel that's an entirely different video. There are external softwares like Note Performer that you can use within notation softwares to make it sound better, but I'm going to leave that whole conversation for an entirely different video where we talk about the use of virtual instruments within notation software. I have done separate videos talking about how you can do it within MuseScore and a couple of other ones with other softwares, but again, we'll leave that for another video. But ultimately, in summary, when deciding should I work within a DAW or should I work within notation software, it largely depends on the project and what are you ultimately trying to achieve. If you have live musicians and you want to create a piece for them, obviously you're going to be using notation software so you can give them a physical score. But if you don't have an orchestra at your disposal, yes, I guess you could still use notation software and write your score in there, especially if you get distracted very easily by sounds and virtual instruments. It's a really nice place to just focus on the music, and then you can export it and put it into a DAW and, as I've already said, zhuzh it up. But if you want to record and create more poppy music or create something more synthetic and electronic, highly recommend DAWs for that purpose. Another thing we should probably brush over as well is skill level. Maybe you're better at creating notation music than you are working in a DAW. Maybe you don't like working with piano rolls and MIDI, and so you'd rather work with traditional sheet music and notation and can create better results there. Or maybe you can't read music at all, but you can read MIDI very well and piano rolls. So it largely depends on where your skills are, where your talents are, and again, what you're trying to achieve with the project. But hopefully this video has been helpful. I know we've jumped around a little bit, but hopefully you've enjoyed it and I've at least given you some food for thought. But thank you so much for watching. If there's anything else you want me to cover or talk about, let me know down in the comments and I'll either reply or make another video. I'm definitely going to be doing a whole video just dedicated to virtual instruments within notation software and having that debate, which should be a very interesting conversation with myself. But thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.